In April 2026, Ukraine destroyed the last railway ferry crossing the Kerch Strait. Not one of several, the last one still running. Every other vessel that had been moving fuel, ammunition, and military equipment across that stretch of water to Russian forces in Crimea had already been put out of action. The Slavyanin was that last vessel, and on the night of April 5th, Ukrainian military intelligence sent drones after it. Russia now has one primary route left to supply an entire militarized peninsula, a bridge that Ukraine has already hit multiple times and that a retired four-star American general recently described without apparent hesitation as eventually coming down. Putin took Crimea in 2014 because he believed it was the key to everything. Black Sea dominance, Mediterranean reach, and a warm water base no Russian leader had been willing to surrender since Catherine the Great. He wasn't wrong about any of that. What he got wrong was the assumption that taking it was the hard part. 12 years later, Ukraine is dismantling the supply chain that keeps Crimea Russian. And the men who study this war for a living are now saying things in public that a year ago they were only saying in private. Here's what's actually happening and why 2026 might be the year the map changes in ways Putin genuinely cannot reverse. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges spent nearly 4 decades in the United States Army, rising to commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, a job that requires having a working understanding of Russian military doctrine, Black Sea geography, and what happens when you lose a peninsula you've built your entire southern strategy around. His assessment of this war has been consistent since 2022. Crimea is the decisive terrain of the war, not whatever town Russia is currently grinding through at the cost of several hundred men per square kilometer. Crimea, specifically and without ambiguity. The reason is straightforward once you see it. Whoever controls Crimea controls the Black Sea's northern shelf. Control that shelf and the projection range extends west toward Romania and Bulgaria, south through Turkey's straits, and east as far as Georgia, which is why every empire that ever wanted to matter in this part of the world fought over it. The Sevastopol naval base, 240 years old, contested by every empire that ever held this coastline, is the anchor point for all of that reach. Russia's ability to fire Kaliber cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities from open water, threaten NATO's eastern flank, and maintain any southern military identity. All of it runs through Sevastopol. Take that away and the entire strategic architecture collapses. Putin called Crimea an unsinkable aircraft carrier when he took it. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing an operational reality that every military planner in Moscow, Kiev, Washington, and London already understood. Ukraine understands it too, which is why from the first week of the full-scale invasion, Crimea was never just a political objective on a map, it was a targeting list. Russia spent a decade adding things to it without realizing. Ukraine's approach to Crimea over the past 4 years has been easy to misread as a series of isolated strikes. A warship disabled in 1 month, a radar installation gone the next. The Crimean bridge taking damage and closing for repairs. Viewed individually, none of it looked like a coordinated campaign. It wasn't isolated. It was sequential and deliberate. The kind of campaign that only becomes legible once you look at the cumulative effect rather than individual incidents. The targeting logic followed a clear priority order. Air defense systems went first because a Crimea with degraded radar coverage is a Crimea that's harder to defend on the next strike. Communication nodes and command infrastructure came next for the same compounding reason. Then the Black Sea Fleet itself, the Moskva, Russia's flagship, was struck by Ukrainian Neptune missiles in April 2022 and sank the following day, taking with it the fleet's most capable air defense platform and its symbolic center simultaneously. Then the naval base at Sevastopol hit repeatedly until Russia's remaining ships relocated to Novorossiysk, which Ukraine also hit. The September 2023 strike on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters building in Sevastopol, sometimes called Operation Crab Trap, targeted the command structure directly with Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Russian officials were notably quiet about the details afterward. State television moved on quickly. In Russia, that's usually the most reliable indicator of how bad the news actually was. Each of these operations degraded something specific, and each degradation made the next operation easier because the systems designed to detect and stop incoming strikes were progressively fewer and less capable. By the time 2026 arrived, Russia's Black Sea Fleet had effectively lost the ability to operate freely from Sevastopol. The fleet that was supposed to dominate the northern Black Sea was hiding, and hiding didn't make them safe. When Russia moved Kerch-class missile ships, each carrying 8 Calibar cruise missiles, away from Crimea entirely, Ukraine followed them. On May 3, 2026, Ukrainian forces struck a Kerch vessel at Primorsk on the Russian mainland coast, a joint operation that also destroyed a Shadow Fleet tanker and damaged the port's oil infrastructure. The fleet that started this war firing missiles from Sevastopol is now being hunted wherever it drops anchor and running out of places to hide. The Slavyanin wasn't a flagship or a symbol. It was a workhorse, a railway ferry that had been quietly moving military equipment, fuel, and ammunition across the Kerch Strait, while the more visible supply routes were being degraded one by one. Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed the strike on the night of April 5th to 6th. The DIU's description was precise: the last railway ferry still operational in the Kerch Strait. That word, last, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Russia had built its Crimea supply chain around redundancy. Multiple ferry routes across the Kerch Strait, the Crimean Bridge for road and rail, and land corridors through occupied Kherson and Zaporizhzhia as the ground alternative. The idea was that no single strike could sever the supply line because there were always alternatives. Ukraine didn't try to sever the supply line in one operation. It spent 4 years eliminating the alternatives one by one until the alternatives ran out. It removed the last backup that was keeping the supply line functional when the primary route was unavailable. What remains now is the Crimean Bridge, and the land routes through occupied territory that run close enough to the front line to be within range of Ukrainian drones, artillery, and missiles on any given day. The bridge is the problem Russia doesn't have an answer for. Ukraine has hit it on multiple occasions, forcing temporary closures for repairs each time, and has clearly demonstrated it can reach it whenever it chooses to. The bridge cost Russia approximately $4 billion to build. More importantly, it is not replaceable on any timeline that matters to this war. There is no backup Kerch Bridge. There is no contingency plan for its permanent loss beyond accepting that Crimea becomes functionally cut off from mainland Russia. Hodges said it plainly: that big bridge is eventually going to come down, not if. Eventually. From a man who spent 4 decades choosing his words carefully in briefing rooms where imprecision has consequences. 2 weeks after the Slavyanin strike, on April 20th, Ukrainian forces struck 2 large Russian landing ships moored in Sevastopol Bay, the Yamal and the Nikolai Filchenkov, both Soviet-era vessels, the Yamal capable of transporting 500 tons of cargo, including armored vehicles and troops, the Filchenkov rated for around 1,000 tons. Both are now assessed as out of action, which means Russia's ability to move heavy equipment and troops to Crimea by sea has effectively gone from degraded to eliminated. Ukraine eliminated the last railway ferry in the Kerch Strait and put 2 of Russia's primary amphibious logistics vessels out of commission. That's not coincidence. It's a coordinated effort to close off every remaining channel through which Russia could reinforce or resupply Crimea by water, executed within a single 2-week window. The strategic logic behind this is the one Hodges has been describing since the early stages of the war. You don't need to assault Crimea directly if you can make it militarily untenable through isolation. Cut the supply lines thoroughly enough, and the Russian forces on the peninsula become what military planners call a force in being. Units that officially exist and are counted in order of battle assessments, but that cannot be meaningfully sustained, reinforced, or resupplied. The April window was where that logic became impossible to misread. The land routes through Kherson and Zaporizhzhia are still open, technically. But open and safe are different things when Ukrainian drones are scanning those corridors around the clock, and the front line is close enough that artillery is a practical option. Russian convoys moving through occupied territory toward Crimea are not moving quietly. And Ukrainian drone operators who have had 4 years to learn what a Russian logistics convoy looks like from 400 meters up are not known for letting them pass. Ukraine knows they're there and has already demonstrated it can reach them. While Ukraine was eliminating Russia's logistics options in Crimea, something equally significant was happening in European politics, in a way that had nothing to do with the battlefield and everything to do with what happens on it. For months, a €90 billion EU loan earmarked for Ukraine had been blocked. The blocker was Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who had spent years cultivating a relationship with Moscow that made him simultaneously the most useful person Putin had inside the EU and the most reliable source of diplomatic frustration for everyone trying to support Ukraine through European institutions. On April 12, 2026, Orban's party lost the Hungarian parliamentary elections. The veto that had been blocking the loan fell with him. The EU loan is now moving. When it arrives, it goes directly into Ukraine's defense industry, its procurement of munitions and supplies, and its ability to sustain the operational tempo that has been producing the results described in this video. Ukraine's domestic defense sector has been expanding throughout the war. Contractors, drone programs, missile development, and that expansion requires capital at a scale that changes planning horizons from months to years. For Putin, the Orban loss is also a political defeat in a dimension he rarely discusses publicly. Orban was one of the only leaders inside both the NATO alliance and the European Union who was reliably willing to act as a brake on Western support for Ukraine. He's gone, and the brake mechanism he provided went with him. The political architecture that Putin had spent years cultivating inside European institutions has a large and obvious hole in it, and there's no obvious candidate to fill it. Russia's response to the Orban news was notably muted. The Kremlin does not enjoy acknowledging when things go wrong in domains it considered secure. They are getting quite a lot of practice at that lately. Putin took Crimea in 2014, believing he had secured it for generations. The operation was efficient, well-planned, and largely bloodless, a genuine operational success by any military assessment. He moved quickly during a window of Ukrainian political instability, deployed forces without insignia to create ambiguity, leveraged Russia's pre-existing basing rights in Sevastopol, and had effective control of the peninsula within weeks. At the time, Western response was limited to sanctions. The world adjusted to the new reality, and Putin appears to have concluded from that experience that Crimea was a settled question. The West would adjust, Ukraine would accept it eventually, and Russia had acquired a permanent strategic asset at low cost. What he did not account for was a war that lasted 4 years and produced a Ukraine with operational experience, domestic weapons production, Western military support, and a specific institutional focus on making Crimea as militarily expensive to hold as possible. The peninsula he took in 2014 as the anchor of Russia's Black Sea dominance is now a liability that bleeds resources every month on defense, resupply, and damage repair, while the supply chain sustaining all of it is being eliminated by the country he tried to prevent from becoming militarily capable. Hodges described what comes next in terms that don't leave much room for optimism if you're in Moscow. If Ukraine regains control of Crimea's ports and airfields, the entire operational picture in the Black Sea changes. Russia loses its power projection platform, the fleet loses its base, and the missiles that have been striking Ukrainian cities from Crimean positions stop coming from that direction, while Ukraine gains the ability to project force southward for the first time in this war. A ground assault on Crimea isn't necessary yet. Ukraine doesn't need to storm the beaches when it can starve the garrison, and 2026 is very much the starving phase. But everything pointing out of April 2026, the ferry, the landing ships, the EU loan, the bridge that is eventually going to come down is pointing the same direction. Putin built his strategic legacy around Crimea, called it sacred, called it inseparable from Russia, called it an unsinkable aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier is taking on water, and the repair crews are running out of parts. Whether the bridge comes down before any ceasefire changes everything. That's the argument worth having in the comments. Subscribe if this is the level of analysis you want. Bell's there. See you in the next one.